Well, I think we'll get started, and then if anyone else jumps in, they can kind of pick things up where we are. Just wanted to say good morning. My name is Brenda Schaefer-Pellinan, and I am a planner with the Arrowhead Area Agency on Aging. I'd like to welcome you and thank you for joining us for today's session on home sharing as a housing option. Before we start, just a few housekeeping items. Today's session will be recorded, and I will send out a link in the next coming days to the recording for you. Please keep your microphone set to mute at this time. If you experience any issues with your bandwidth, it may help to disable your camera. So just if you run into any glitches along the way. We are going to as we're going, Anna Marie has indicated she is fine with taking questions as we go. So if you have a question, please feel free to address those questions to her. And just a quick reminder to visit our Facebook page for more information about the remaining upcoming sessions in our series. We've got ones coming up on assistive technology, home modifications, and housing and older adults, the continuum of options. I'd like to welcome our speaker for today, Anna Marie Puhar, and thank you for joining us today. Anna Marie founded the nonprofit Sharing Housing, Inc. and serves as its president. The organization advocates for and provides education in how to implement shared housing for both professionals and individuals. She's the author of Sharing Housing, a guidebook for finding and keeping good housemates, which gives a step-by-step process for screening potential housemates. This process she honed through her own personal experience of living in shared housing for over 20 years and is combined with expertise in group process and interpersonal relations. We greatly appreciate Anna Marie joining us today and sharing her knowledge. Welcome, Anna Marie.
Thank you so much, Brenda. To clarify, I have quite a lot of information to give you, and I'm going to be talking. It's very strange not to be able to have an audience that I can see and all of that. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat, and Brenda will take a look at them and we'll interrupt. And I would love to be able to have a dialogue and conversation. But with that, I am going to share my screen and start our presentation. You can see that all right, Brenda? Yep,
We
we're
can
good.
see you just fine.
Excellent. So, exploring home sharing as a housing option. People ask me how I got started with this, and the answer is kind of by accident because, like many people in my generation, I lived in shared housing, group houses during college, post college. And I continued to do it because I always knew that I liked to save money on housing and have the companionship. The picture here is of the house that I bought on purpose to live in as shared housing. It's 4-bedroom house. It was a true fixer upper. And I lived in it for 10 years. And while I was living in that house, I was having a conversation with a friend who was complaining about her finances. And I said, well, you have an asset, use it. And she said, what are you talking about? I said, rent a room in your house. And she did something like, I don't know how to do that. And I did something like, well, I do. And she was like, oh, you're right. You do know. And so we had quite a conversation about it. But it sparked the idea that led to writing the book, which is Sharing Housing, a guidebook for finding and keeping good housemates. I started writing the book in 2008. It was published in 2011. And it was really as I was publishing the book that I was going, well, actually, who is this book for? And what I discovered, to my great surprise, is that living alone is really common. 27% of households in this country are single occupancy. In Minnesota has the same, but in Northland, where you guys are, it's 44% of households are single occupancy. And that means that seniors end up living alone. This is a chart that comes from the Harvard Joint Housing Studies people. And you can see that one of the things that happens and is projected is that as people age, they are more likely to live alone. You can, the three bars is 2018 is the blue, 2028 is the green, 2038 is the yellow. And of course, the reason why more people as they get older are more likely to live alone is because spouses die. And people just continue to live in the marital home. Of course they would. Why wouldn't they? But that means that they are living alone. And we're going to talk some more about what that does to people. Here is your stats about in 2025, your percentages of people over the age of 65. It is huge. 43%, 40. You know these stats, I suspect. And but you're not unique. Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont have the same kind of issues. Oregon, Washington State, it's sort of a national problem. And so I'm on a campaign to convince people that shared housing is a win-win, both for the benefit of cost and also for the benefit of companionship. I'm going to talk a lot more about that. In the literature and as a culture, I think we tend to think of shared housing as a less than solution. It's kind of for people who are almost homeless or poor people. And I am wanting to say, no, 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 no. It is a really good solution for people who are living alone. So, what are we going to do today? What I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about the benefits of shared housing, talk some about some of the barriers, talk about what organizations can do and how we can support shared housing, and then open it up for a Q&A. So that's my plan. With that, the benefits I think are 5 big categories. There's a financial benefit, there's companionship, there's help, there's sustainability, and something I call whole person health. And I'm going to describe each one of these. The cost benefit is one that I think everybody understands right off the bat. You save money on housing. But look at what's true in this country. The blue bars are the average cost for a single person, their monthly expenses, no mortgage, rent, and mortgage. The yellow bars is the average Social Security payment, male and female. Average. That means that half of the people are below, half of the people are above. So, what this says is that nobody in the United States who is retired, living on Social Security at the average level, can afford to live by themselves at all, anywhere. This is a disaster, and you guys know about it. It's coming. It's a really big disaster. Along with that, people have something called housing cost burden, which you may or may not know about. A moderately cost burden household pays between 30 and 50% of their income on housing. A severely cost burden person is spending more than 50%. And what this chart shows us is that the single parent is the most likely to be cost burdened, followed by the single person, and then married, et cetera, et cetera. So cost burden is a way of understanding how pinched people are feeling about the cost of housing. And in the Northland region, what you have, and I was really stunned when I saw this, that owner households, 55% of them are cost burdened, spending over 30% of their income on housing. And the renters are 44%. It's interesting that actually the owners are more cost burdened than the renters. That's not the national norm. So, with that, what I am saying, which is sort of dead obvious, is that if you save money on housing, if you share housing, you save money on housing. And one of the ways to think about it is if you just have an extra $500 a month, that turns to 6,000 a year. That is not chump change. It's either, depending on where you are on the economic spectrum, it could be the, keeping me from being cost burdened, all the way to allowing me to take a luxury vacation I've never taken before. So the cost benefit is kind of what everybody understands, but they stick to it for the benefit of companionship. And I'm going to talk about this for quite a bit and start by saying we are wired to be socially connected and to live in villages like this. We lived like this for millennia. Okay, maybe we weren't actually in Africa, but we were all over the place, our ancestors. And it turns out that our brains are wired for social connection. And I think what with COVID and the social distancing of the last year, we're learning a lot more about that particular thing. So people are used to living, we were wired to live in villages and live together, and all kinds of people lived together for quite a long time. So, for instance, these people lived together. I used Downton Abbey. I mean, of course, it's a very fancy house, but the fact of the story is because they lived under a roof together. Two different two different economic strata, yes, indeed. But Downton Abbey and that kind of a thing, it was pretty common for quite a long time for people to live with each other. Ministers boarded, teachers boarded, apprentices boarded, ranch hands boarded. People shared housing. And we changed that and turned ourselves into something like this. Post World War II, with the GI Bill and the development of suburbia, we developed this idea that everybody should be in a single family house in the suburbia with a car and a backyard, et cetera, et cetera. And so we now have 27% of our population living by themselves because that became the cultural norm. And why did it become the cultural norm? Well, I believe it's because we have a myth. And this myth is of the self reliant, independent person epitomized by the cowboy on the prairie by himself, the Marlboro Man. But that's a myth. The West was settled by people in wagon trains who worked together to do barn raisings. It was a community thing. This American self reliance is a deep myth, and it's hurtful because it's not the way we're supposed to be. So, one of the things we've learned is that it is really easy for people to feel left out. And left out is a childish feeling of nobody wants to play with me. Everybody else is having a grand time and I'm not having a good time at all. And it is a common experience. And unfortunately, left out is a real thing and it hurts. And what some researchers have found out, um, there's a book called Lonely in America, Drifting Apart in the 21st Century, written by two shrinks at Harvard medical school who realized that they had people coming to them saying, I'm so depressed. I'm so depressed. And they were like, no, they're not depressed. They are lonely. And lonely is a shameful feeling. We feel like it is our fault that we are lonely. But the truth of the matter is, loneliness hits a part of the brain that is the same part as physical pain. We are supposed to do something about it when we feel lonely. So if you're thirsty, you feel that pain, you drink water. If you're hungry, you eat. When you're lonely, where do you go? And I think COVID has made this so much worse that the culture is changing. People are realizing, ooh, I do need people. What happens, unfortunately, is that people who are lonely can sink into chronic loneliness. And we now know that chronic loneliness is not only deeply painful, but deeply destructive. It's an emotional and physical um, hurt to the body. So there's a researcher named John Cacioppo. He's no longer alive, but he wrote the book called Loneliness. And he studied it. He's a neurophysiologist. He studied it for years. And this is his research that lonely is physical pain, and that lonely leads to a range of stuff. So they say that, and he once corrected me in email, so I'm going to say it right, that loneliness has a higher risk of early mortality than smoking 15 cigarettes a day. We are not supposed to be lonely. It also leads to suicidal ideation. It leads to increased inflammation. It leads to increased doctor visits. It leads to bad behaviors like eating more fatty food, drinking more alcohol, trying to manage pain by stimulants and drugs and so on and so forth, because lonely hurts. And it's a vicious cycle, unfortunately. The vicious cycle is you feel left out, you get lonely, you're ashamed. And what happens because you're ashamed is it's harder to reach out. It's harder to take action to fix it. Why would anybody want to play with me? I'm already in that shameful place. And so people get fearful, they get aggressive, they don't notice good things happening to them. They notice bad things happening to them. I think this is describing some of the behaviors we're seeing in our culture right now. And so it becomes more and more chronic. And the problem for us as human beings is we are as adaptive as the frog. And by that, I mean, there's a metaphor that if you take a frog and you throw him in boiling water, he realizes he's in danger and jumps right out. But if you take the frog and you put it in cold water and you turn the heat underneath the frog, that frog never realizes the frog is in danger and dies, can be boiled to death. I think it's true for us too. People get adapted to their loneliness in a way that they then say, what's the point? And so what I'm hoping is that in this effort, we can cut that, because when you share housing, you have natural, daily, informal companionship. It even just saying, hello, how was your day, can lift a person's spirits. And that, and you don't have to do any work for it. I mean, one of the things that's happened in our society is that what with all of our media for being connected, I find myself texting my sister to make a plan for a phone call. Huh? You know, these kinds of things are happening to us so that it takes more work to reach out. Whereas if you're living with somebody, say hi, you run into them in the kitchen. So companionship is a really big, big piece of why shared housing is a good idea. And I will tell you that people have said, I started sharing housing for the cost benefit. I'm staying because of the companionship benefit. But I have three more to talk about. Tasks. Getting help with tasks around the house can be really useful for an older person, especially if we start talking about sharing housing in a multi-generational way. And that's so, there's a lot of work in taking care of a home. And I think that it's true that people who are in couples or in families don't necessarily notice all the ways they help each other. But if you live by yourself, you're doing it all. You're doing it all. Taking out the trash, the compost, buying the toilet paper, you got the gist. Um, but along with tasks, another way that you get help is with mutual help. So I have a range that I think of it with one end being convenience. So assuming that you have a cat and your housemate is happy about having a cat, you say, I'm thinking about going away for the weekend. Would you feed the cat? That's convenience. Or you're sick in bed with the flu. Can you pick up some chicken soup when you go to the store? It's a very different kind of asking for help than calling a friend who lives across town and has to bring it to you. So that's the convenience spectrum. The far side, the right hand, the life-threatening emergencies, of course, the biggest one is falling and not being able to get up. And that we know that that happens to old people. And we know that many old people don't think it will happen to them. We don't think it will happen to us, but it does. So getting this kind of mutual support is a big benefit for older people in shared housing. There's the benefit of sustainability. That is, of course, if you're living under one roof, you're using less of the world's resources. There are other things that go into this. If you're sharing housing, you probably need less stuff, less toasters, irons, ironing boards, Cuisinarts, mixers, spatulas, etc. And possibly you might not need a car if you live in shared housing in an area that allows you to be car free. My last benefit is the benefit of whole person health. And for me, this is me saying this, but I believe that one of the things that is important in our lives on a daily basis is being able to give and to receive. And that behavior of giving and receiving in little and big ways is necessary to our existence. It's just who we are. And you don't notice it when you're in a family or with a couple because you're doing it all the time. But you don't get that unless you have some way of giving and receiving. And the way I usually say it is, if you don't get to do it, I think our souls shrivel up. And I think it might be some of the data behind the social science or the research on loneliness. And I believe that giving and receiving gives us joy and love. And I don't mean love in the romanticized, sexualized sense of current American culture. I mean it in that more global feeling of we are all family and we belong to each other. And if we can have all the benefits, cost, companionship, mutual support, sustainability, and whole person health, we have an opportunity to live with a daily back and forth of something I will call love, for lack of a better word. So, those are the benefits that I see in living in shared housing. And I think that they're really big. And I think a lot more people can do shared housing. What I think of is that this is a relationship that is unique. It is unlike any other relationship a person can have. And so I'm hoping to coin a word. You're hearing it here, that you have home mates. And a home mate is a person that you like and respect, whose ways of living at home are compatible enough that everybody is comfortable. And that is the key, that you're compatible enough that everybody is comfortable and that you like and respect each other. This is my picture. Actually, the drawing was done by my nephew, but kind of this giving and receiving of home mates. I also think that home mate is a relationship that matures. When you move in, you're housemates. And maybe, given enough stuff, you grow into the relationship of being a home mate. But there are barriers to this idea. I know that there are barriers. I've been working on this for 10, 11, 12 years or so. And here are some of the big ones, and I'm going to talk about them. Past experience, lost privacy, bad match, exploitation, and vulnerability. Past experience. I did that once and I could never do it again. Excuse me. Did you give up ever working because you had a bad boss? Did you give up dating because you had a bad date? Um, what I want to say is that the homemate relationship is different than any other relationship you have in your life. It is not family with past history and memories and blood ties, etc., and culture, nor is it friends necessarily. You might have a friend who is somebody you absolutely adore hanging out with for an evening, but living with that person who never picks up clothes when she drops them, forget it. That kind of a thing. So, past experience is not necessarily a harbinger of future experience. Lost privacy. Sure, people are afraid of losing privacy. And to that, I say actually a number of different things. One is your room is always your own. The housemate's room, each person has their privacy in their own room, absolutely all the time. That's one. Two, um, privacy for what? So this is an interesting place for me because, maybe what the person is thinking is I need my privacy because I don't want anybody to know that I like not to get dressed all day long. So find somebody who also doesn't like to get dressed all day long. I think that it's possible for people to find people with whom they would be compatible enough to live together. And then my third one is, interestingly enough, that after a while, what was once my privacy becomes our privacy. And I realized when somebody raised this with me as a question in a presentation that I've always assumed that what happens at home stays at home. So you don't share that because it's your home. kind of thing. Bad match. Of course, that's a big issue. And of course, people have bad matches. And that is the piece that my organization, Sharing Housing, is working so hard on, because it is our belief that, oh no, let's say it differently. Up to date, it's still true. Every single bad housemate story I've heard about has come about because the person who was the bad housemate was not interviewed carefully. Or there might not even have been an interview. Oh, it was my son's best friend. Oh, something like that. So our campaign is to teach people how, in fact, to do the selection process. Um, and then the last one, exploitation and vulnerability, is one I feel strongly about, and could be a problem, because it depends on how old the person is. And this is where I would love to see more social services support home sharing, so that for the vulnerable, we have support places. Not everybody is vulnerable, though. Another set of barriers, two of them. One is stuff, managing stuff. You know, we all have stuff. Most of us have too much stuff. What do you do with it? Where does it go? But one of the things I've noticed as a barrier is people saying, I need to clean out that room, and never doing it. So that's a barrier people have. Another barrier is simply energy, getting it done. Moving is a stressor. Changing your way you live is a stressor. So how do we support people so that they have the energy for doing it? That is a big question I don't have the answer to. I'm looking for it. So what I would say, oh, yeah, I forgot that one. So home share is growing. It is growing. Bit by bit, people are changing, and it's becoming more something that people talk about and think about. We have a closed Facebook group called Hello Homemate, and that group has grown with people saying, I'm tired of living alone. I'm tired of living alone. I'd like to share. So we can see that the culture is changing around home share. So how do we encourage it? This is a slide I created to try to help people see something. The two scales here are independence and vulnerability. And what you see is that there are people who are very high in independence, low in vulnerability, and they can do it themselves. I've had people say, I've been home sharing for years. You know, I don't need your book. And I've had people say, read your book, took care of, thank you for the book, thought about things I hadn't thought about. I'm good. And they run with it. At the other end of the spectrum are people who are high in vulnerability and low in independence. And I think of people in their 80s and 90s when I say this. And for them, they really do need matching programs. We need to hold their hand and help them do this, because it's scary, because they feel vulnerable, and we want to make sure that they have a good arrangement. But then there's all the people in the middle. There are the people who have some vulnerability and some independence, and they could do it themselves if they know what to do, if they have skills, and if they're encouraged. And that's where I think my organization is trying to encourage people in that place. But we are going to talk some more about how we do advocacy and education to encourage home sharing. The first one I really believe is we have to make this choice normal. It can't be a less than. It has to be a win-win. We have to talk about it a lot, which is why I'm talking to you now. We have to keep talking about it. You know, advertisers spend a lot of money with the same message over and over and over and over again. Why? Because it works. So we need to work on making this choice normal for people. So we also need to provide training and informational programs, which is another way of making it normal so that people know what to expect, know what they can get out of it, and help them overcome their fears. We can provide services. How about doing background screenings? Making it easy for people to get the criminal and the financial background. Um, we have matching assist. You could do matching assistance. You could have mediation and dispute resolution services. You could have templates for legal agreements and house standards. We also need to make sure that there aren't legal barriers. Zoning bylaws, landlord tenant law, both of these need to be looked at. I don't know what they are in Northland. I didn't do that research for you, but you should know what they are. And so there are different kinds of programs around. There are what I call social service programs, nonprofits that do matching. One of them is Home Share Vermont, which is on the other side of my state. I am in near Brattleboro, Vermont. Um, there are about 3 dozen of these programs around the country, and some of them have existed for a really long time. And the way they work is that, people will say, yes, I'd like to have somebody come and share my home, or I'm looking for a home to share. They apply, they go through an interview process with reference checking and so on. And then the program will say, these two might be a good match, and introduce them to each other and help them work out their agreement. Often these programs are multi-generational, in the sense that they're pairing an older person with a younger person who is going to do help in exchange for a reduced rent. So there's a negotiation about what kind of help and how many hours, and that sort of thing gets worked out. I would love to see more of these programs around. Unfortunately, they're expensive to run. And even the best do about 300 matches a year. So that it's not the best all the time. Then there's online matching services. And online matching services, Silvernest is one that is actually focused on older people. It's a national online database that is for profit, so you pay money to do it. Nesterly is another one that has been working for a while, does multi-generational, largely based in the Boston area and Ohio. So one of my problems with the online matching is that often there isn't actually a good pool of candidates in the location where a person might be looking. And I knew the founder. She's since sold the company, and so they started out in Denver and LA, and they were working on a presence in Washington, D.C. when I kind of lost track of what they were up to. So our role, Sharing Housing Inc. here, is working on skill building for individuals. And we have a lot of stuff we have stuff on our website, not as much as I'd love, but it's good stuff, I hope. Sharinghousing.com is our website, and we have the book and the workbook and an interviewing guide. And coming online pretty soon, like next month, is two online courses. One is called 5 Key Benefits of Shared Housing, and will sort of spells out in more detail some of what you've already heard around those 5 benefits. And that course will be free. Then we're going to have a course called Sharing Housing 101, which is a course about what is the process. How do you go from, maybe I'd like to live in shared housing, to actually saying, okay, I'm going to live with that person there. And so it's a course to teach people how to do that. And we will be offering that online for a price. And then we have a newsletter, and we'd love to have you sign up for our newsletter. We seem to be sending out 2 a month. I wish it were 4 a month, but we're not there yet. But we do see, and that's a place to find out about what things are going on with us. And so I'm going to leave you with a quote and open it up for questions from Margaret Mead. I think it is an almost universal human need to have someone who wonders where you are when you don't come home at night.
Well, thank you so much, Anna Marie. We have one question in the chat, and then we can open it up to see if there's any other questions. Lee Peterson was asking, she says, in Duluth, there's a regulation which might require a homeowner to purchase a license and have a building inspection. Anecdotally, homeowners do not openly advertise because of concern. What is your experience with something like this?
So is that regulation to regulate short-term shared housing? Lee, do you know?
Most of my information is anecdotal. I teach a community ed class on living in community, and I received information that said, well, I share with a college student, but I don't tell anybody about it. My understanding is this originated because there was a lot of home ownership, absentee homeowners who then rented to the local college kids. And the Duluth City got concerned about the quality of the rentals. So it's not clear that it applies to a homeowner, home seeker structure.
Yeah. So yes, this kind of thing happens. And I do tell people that they should make sure that they know what their local laws are. I would, if I had all the money and time in the world, try to figure out how to have that changed so that homeowners who are residents can share housing without being requiring a license and a building inspection and all of that kind of stuff. But I certainly understand how people do it under the radar so that they could avoid that. This is one of the many ways in which shared housing has a bad name, because we think of it as a less than, and we think, oh, shared housing is going to be a party house, or it's going to be homeless people or that kind of stuff. So I would check into it, find out what the law actually is. Laws get changed because people say, hey, that doesn't work for me.
Exactly. I was just going to say, Anna Marie, that's one thing that folks can do is, find out in your local jurisdiction what the law, what the ordinances are relating to rentals and to shared housing. Is there anything that addresses it? Is there anything that precludes it? If there are things that are that precluded, are there things, approaching the folks who represent you, whether it's in the city council or the mayor's office, about making changes, reasonable changes to that to allow for situations like this. And also when the local jurisdictions are reviewing their ordinances or their housing codes, bringing that up as a point in conversation to make sure that whatever we're doing, we're not preventing new and innovative models of housing, that we understand that there is some hesitancy with anything new, but trying to make sure that we can get out of our own way a little bit, and we're not preventing good things from happening either.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tricky. This whole business, I watch it pretty carefully,
Mhm.
from a distance about shared housing for Airbnb regulations, that they're not necessarily sort of overdoing it in a way that would make this kind of shared housing I'm talking about, which is such a potential benefit to
Mhm.
so many people, I do believe. So,
Mary was asking, do you ever see issues with family members discouraging this type of arrangement for their loved
absolutely.
ones?
You don't even have to finish the sentence. Yeah, everybody's terrified, right? So, I mean, for that, but so yes, I have seen family members discourage it. What I do hope, honestly, is that if we can convince people to take the course says, that are online, that that will be online, they're not there yet, that it will help bring down the temperature of
Mhm,
worried family members. And especially
mhm,
because I think for people who are vulnerable, having a advocate helping them find somebody they can live with is a
mhm,
really good idea.
mhm,
So, helping them do it, not fighting them doing it, would be
mhm.
great.
Well, and there are, additional things that can make it be not so insurmountable as far as, whether it's, whatever vetting process you choose to use, whether it's require asking for a background check or whether, just common sense things that folks, members of the public have access to in order to address some of those concerns as well.
Right. I do want to say for this that um, a background check and a criminal check do not guarantee that the person
Mhm,
is a good housemate fit. You have to do your own reference checks.
absolutely. Um, Lee was asking, according to the National Shared Housing Research Center, Minnesota doesn't have any nonprofit programs for matching homeowners with a home seeker. Why do you think that it's more popular outside of the Midwest?
I don't think it's a question of being more popular outside the Midwest. The programs, my personal opinion is that the reason the programs that exist have survived
Mhm,
is because they have very entrepreneurial executive directors who go after funding in interesting bundled ways to keep their programs alive.
And Lori was sharing with us that her first job out of college as a new social worker. She facilitated a home sharing program in Rochester 20 years ago now, and that it was a state of Minnesota grant funded program in the early 90s that lost funding in the early 2000s. So
Exactly.
it's not impossible. It's a matter of starting something back up, and you know if there are, you and I have talked about, there's that whole spectrum of assistance that could be provided, everything from just having a web page for folks that you just say, you're on your own, you take any responsibility, we have no liability for this, but providing a space virtually, or whether it's on a bulletin board or whatever, for folks to find each other, all the way to that far end of the spectrum where you've got someone actually facilitating those matches and doing those background checks and things like that. And so there are possibilities that are all the way along that spectrum, ways that we could encourage these types of programs in our area. And it doesn't have to be where we create a whole new entity. It might be that we do something very little, and maybe eventually you do move to something farther along on that spectrum, but there are options.
Yeah, and for I don't even know that, Brenda, whether I have said this out loud to you, but one of my big hopes with our online course is that organizations will come and buy up seats, and then they can turn around and say, take this course. and that the course will support the effort.
And one of my colleagues, Kirsten Cruikshank, was just mentioning also that Lutheran Social Services used to run a program in the Duluth area as well. And
Yeah.
so
There have been programs that come and they go, and you know they lose their funding because I think that they can't show like this big impact. You know, that it's 300 matches a year. That just doesn't sound like very much when you're I don't know, 44% of your seniors or people over 65. I don't know how many people that is, but you just sort of start thinking about the numbers. But I don't know how this is all going to go, but I am hoping that what we've created here, what I've spent the last 5 months working on, will somehow get bundled as being supportive services and help people along and speed up the process, as it were, and also help people be agents of their own destiny. I think part of what happens with shared housing, I know what happens with one of the things that happens with shared housing programs is they have no problem finding home seekers. They have trouble finding householders, people who will open up their house, and they only get to that place when they're like, I really can't do this by myself anymore, and I otherwise I'm going to have to go into a nursing home, and that's almost too late. You know, I want people to start thinking about this in their 60s, and when they have a lot of agency and energy and independence, looking around, who can I live with? Where could I do this? You know, so that they're not in that place of being so vulnerable, etc.
Well, and I know, and I worked with our direct service part of our agency with Senior Linkage Line before, and there was definitely something that we got calls about asking, do you know of anywhere where I can find out about this? You know, and I think I recall when you and I had spoken before, you talking about the fact that one of the best ways for people to find people was through people they know.
Yes.
Because people know you, and they know the other person, and just by letting people that you know that you're looking for something, a situation like that, how that itself could lend itself to some natural connections of folks that know you and know what you're like, and might know someone else who might be interested.
Exactly. Friends of friends of friends of friends, networks, community connections. I believe in them deeply, and think that those are often the best ways to find folks. Do we have other questions?
Anyone else? Feel free to unmute yourself, and if you've got a question.
This is Lori Wasik, and I don't really have a question, but just more of a comment, and just wanted to reiterate how much of a wonderful option I think home sharing is. And it's so unfortunate that it kind of fizzled away here in Minnesota. But when I used to do this work, I mean, it really does work well. And everything that you described, Anna Marie, are the things that we sort of facilitated and instituted as far as matching older adults with often younger homemates. And we did, the background checks. We did, what we called match meetings, where you try to pair people together based on, what they're willing to help with, what the person needs help with at a lower rent, all of those things. And it just really is a nice option. And I assume, yes, like you mentioned, the funding kind of went away because it's hard to show, huge numbers and all this data, to support continuing to pay for it. But I will tell you, the folks that we did work with did benefit from it on both sides, and it really does work well.
It does. Yeah, we just have to get more people thinking that this is something they want to do, that it's a good thing. And yeah, thank you for that, Lori.
Well, and I just want to remind folks, like I said, we have been recording all of our sessions. So if you know folks who are interested in learning more about this, and who are, wanted a little smattering of and trying to get an idea of whether or not maybe taking a class or something like that is something that they want to do, and if they want to look at this as an option, we do have this library of presentations available. And so anyone can get in touch with us, and we can share that the presentation with them as well. So
cool.
And Anne Marie, if you're okay, I will provide your information and the information for your organization when I do the follow-up email with the link. Okay.
Yep, absolutely. Love.
I know one of our attendees does work with one of the senior centers elsewhere in the state, and thought this would be a really great presentation they'd like to be able to offer. So
Cool.
Yep. We'll just spread all over the state.
That is my work. My work is advocating for this and providing education. And, you know, I am supporting the for-profits, the social programs, the independent, what have you. I mean, that's really, really what I'm about, is to talk about this stuff. So happy to do it. And I'm happy for this opportunity.
Awesome. Well, we really appreciate you joining us today and sharing your knowledge and your enthusiasm for the subject. And if no one else has any other questions, again, I'll just remind you that we do have other sessions coming up on assistive technology and home modifications, and also one on the full spectrum of housing options for older adults in the region. And so you can check out our Facebook page to find more information about those and to register for those. I will be sending out information from today's session via email, along with a link to today's session out via email in over the next couple of days. So if there are no other questions, I will just say again, thank you, Anna Marie, so much for sharing your presentation with us today. And thank you everyone for joining us today. And have a wonderful rest of the day, and be careful, as mentioning to Anna Marie, that we're in second winter and going into second winter now here in the Arrowhead. And so we've got snow in the forecast. So everyone take care of yourself and be careful in the inclement weather.
Okay. Thank you so much. Bye,
Thank
everybody.
you.